So good evening, ready to go?
Yeah, so Calum MacPherson, CEO of the Inverness and Cromarty
Perth, Green Freeport, there, I know. Just call it the Green Freeport, that's what I tend to do. Absolutely. Listen, good evening and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you. Always very happy to come to the Black Isle. I was just telling somebody earlier on that when I was very young I lived a few miles that way, just near Ferrantosh, in fact. Talking about your historical society, a bit of history for you. I remember I'm speaking to the last Indigenous Gaelic speaker in the Black Isle, Johnny Cameron. So I can't imagine there's too many people who got a chance to speak to him before he, unfortunately, before he passed. So thank you for the opportunity to come back. My intention is to speak to you for 10-15 minutes or so, and then leave plenty of time for questions. It's quite a big topic, so I'm not going to dive into the detail too much, but if anybody wants any more detail, I'm very happy to either take questions or even to hang around afterwards and have a cup of tea and talk about it a bit more. So what I thought I would do is say just a few words on what's happening at the moment with the Green Freeport, maybe have a wee look back, and some of you will know more about this than I do, just about kind of how we've got to this point. Where we are now, and maybe what we'd like to see 20 years from now, and why we'd like to see that. And I very much, as somebody from this area, I very much like to just reflect a little bit in the context of why we're here and what we're doing, and also because I find it kind of interesting. Hydropower. I've had a few folks say to me things like, well, you know, we've never done anything like this before, and we'll never be able to do some of these things you're talking about. And I sort of talk, well, you know, we have done it before in terms of a sort of quite a green industrial revolution, if you want to call it that. A couple of pictures there. The bottom one is Canach, which a few of you might know. My grandfather would have worked in some of those hydro schemes way back in the day. He was actually the main one he worked on was Clooney, so between here and Skye. And unbelievably, if those of you who know Canach, in those days there was, those Nissan huts had 1,500 people. But and remember, in those days it was because the war had finished, the government wanted to give people something to do. So that was from about 1955 through to 1965. So it was a big boom. But what happened with these things, of course, is these things got built and they're still here today and a legacy for the area. But then, of course, everybody left again. So we went from a bit of a population boom to a bit of a lull. Now, the next slide, that's in my lifetime, and I'm not that old. So this is Port of Nig, back in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, look at the colour of the water. That won't be happening again. But in those days, you may or may not be aware that 40% of the offshore installations in the North Sea were built here, either at Nig or at Ardasir. At that point, there was 14,000 people working in the area, but it was a real boom and bust again. And but what it did do is it brought people here, many of whom have stayed in this area. At that point, oil and gas was booming. I think I put the numbers there. You know, 1.85 million barrels of crude per day. But listen, those days are past now, and there'll be those. I spoke last week to people in Aberdeen. Some of them don't want to hear it, but there's just less oil, and it's getting more difficult to come out. Although there will be oil coming out of the North Sea for many years to come. But the real reason why the Green Freeport was created, and the reason why me and my small team of 5 are so passionate about it, and I should say, for avoidance of doubt, we're a not-for-profit small business. There's no shareholding, so any money we make gets rolled on to our costs going forward. As I say, there's 5 of us, not 500 of us. I think people sometimes think we're a big shiny tower in Inverness or something. But what really kind of drives us is in these numbers here, which are both interesting but frightening at the same time. So Scotland's population as a whole over the last 20 odd years has grown. And in actual fact also in the Highlands, and I should say Highland Council area, it's also grown from about 212,000 to 238,000. The challenge we have, ladies and gentlemen, is that at the same time we've been losing our working age population, in particular our young people. So I'll come back to the housing in a second, but the bottom one, in the last census in the Highland Council area, we lost 3.7% of our working age people, particularly our young people. And I'm afraid that's not the first or not the second, that's the third decade where we've seen us losing our young people. They're just leaving the area because they don't have work, they don't see prospects, or they're going off to university and they don't come back. Or some do come back, but more stay away than come back. And the real challenge we have is, and we see it already in some of the services that we're trying to provide in the area, like some doctors. My daughter's a veterinary student. There are a real crisis with vets being in the area. Our local abattoir in Digno is likely to close because one of the reasons is they just can't get vets to come and do what they do. So what we have to do something that stops our young people leaving the area and our people to come back. On top of that, add the fact that in terms of housing, and housing is another big area we have a challenge. Back in the 2000s, there were about 30,000 units up to being built roughly in the area, and now, in Scotland rather, and now we're talking about 80,000. There's been a huge decline in houses getting built. If you layer on top of that the fact that unfortunately families are now, well, I forget the stat, maybe some of you know better than me, 40% or thereabouts of families don't stay together, so there's 2 houses needed. People are living in smaller house numbers. So there's a whole lot of reasons why at the moment in this area there's a list of 9,000 people on a housing waiting list, and a real demand. And we have people also saying this, we recently did a survey of 490 18-year-olds in East the Ross area, and a lot of them just said, well, I'll be leaving, there's nowhere to live, and I don't want to live with mum and dad forever or they'll kill me. So we've really got to think long term about the consequence. And without being too dramatic about it, if we see another 10 years, and in another 10 years where we lose another 3.7% and another 3% of our young people, we're in real trouble. We will not have nurses, we will not have people to work in care homes, we will not have people to do the public services. So we must do something, and if we do nothing, then we're in trouble. And that's, to be honest with you, what's motivated a lot of people and me to do what we're doing. As well as the transition to green energy, which we'll come on to as well. So, what's the solution? I'll give you doom and gloom, but I don't like doom and gloom, so we need to try and do something more positive about it. Well, I talked to you before about when the hydro dam schemes came to the area, the population went up and then tailed off. Then oil and gas came, boomed again, and then it sort of tailed off again. Well, currently off the coast here in the North Sea, there is a lease round called Scotland, which is for offshore wind. It's one of the biggest in the world, although the Germans and the Norwegians and others are sort of catching up very quickly, the Danish. So what we have is an opportunity. Instead of being a situation where, at the moment, what happens is when something gets built here for a wind turbine, and you'll all know that the onshore wind turbines that you can see can be in other places, none of those components come from the UK. They're all brought in by boat, by ship. And some of you will probably say, well, there's a disadvantage. Not only do we get the wind turbines, but we're not getting to build anything or make anything or do anything. So the plan is, and what we've been pushing for, is to try and get some of the manufacturing jobs, which are the ones that will stay here for another 50 or 100 years to come here. And that area offshore, and some of those blocks, by the way, are about taking the oil and gas platforms and converting them into green energy stations. But that represents about £40 billion worth of work. At the moment, if we don't do anything, that work will simply go elsewhere in Europe and in Asia. So we need to do something to counter that, because if we get this right, it could mean jobs for the long term in this region. That's the kind of thing that's been talked about built offshore. That's a pilot one. They're pretty big, and I, for one, quite like the idea of them being offshore rather than onshore, for various reasons. But it's new engineering. To give you an idea, that floating case on the bottom is big enough to drive a bus around. So these are big bits of engineering. So that's kind of the challenge we have. The opportunity we see is to try and get involved in offshore wind. And to be honest with you, as I put it to somebody, for centuries, the fact that we've got deep lochs and high hills means we can't build roads, we can't build things, we're disadvantaged. But now the fact that we're in the windiest, wettest part of Europe starts to become an advantage. So let's use it to try and stabilise the place we live. So what is the Green Freeport? That question was asked, what is a Green Freeport? Now, I have to say there's a lot of, despite doing dozens and dozens and dozens of events like this, and speaking to hundreds of businesses and the journalists and doing stuff online, people, it's still not very clear what it is. So I keep telling people what it is. But first of all, it's not everywhere. There's just 5 locations that are, if you like, the Green Freeport tax sites. And what we did is we picked brownfield sites, so typically sites that were industrial but have been disused for a very long time. So we didn't really want to break ground in new areas and take away agricultural land or take down woodland. It's all brownfield sites that were here before. So places like Nig, Ardeshir, Port of Cromarty Firth and Invergordon, Highland Deep Haven, which you'll know is the closest site to here, and then in and around Inverness, the port and some of the campus areas. So it's not everywhere, it's just those specific sites. And you can go online onto the uk.gov website and look specifically at what is in the tax site. So they were very carefully selected. But the idea is that we'll get these ports working together, and when somebody comes to do, as is happening just now at Nig, when somebody comes to build an offshore wind farm, they can come and they can work between those various locations. Brilliantly, we have managed at Port of Nig to get the Sumitomo cable factory. So they're investing 300 million just now, they're creating 300 jobs. Right now there are local men and women, being 15 trainers being trained in Japan to come back here, and they will train staff locally. So there are men and women who've got jobs, well paid long-term jobs now that they wouldn't have had otherwise, including the Allness football team manager. And I was told, could you please not take any more football managers from the area because we need them to stay. So, and we have lots of apprentices as well. There's currently apprentice Roundswood as well. So people from Tane and that side of the water who are now managing to get opportunities that they didn't otherwise have. I won't dwell on this too long, but very happy to go into a bit of an explanation. What actually is a Green Freeport? What does that mean? So what it means is when, for example, somebody comes to invest on a particular site, and as long as they invest that money, we'll get some tax breaks. So for example, the non-domestic rates relief that they normally pay business rates, they get relief for that for 5 years. But that's not lost to area, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But just to be clear, they keep paying corporation tax, they keep paying PAYE, everything that's on the site keeps paying, all the taxes are there. So it's not that there's no tax in that area, it's just certain taxes they don't pay. But for some of them, it's the difference between do they build a factory here or do they do it in Germany or in Denmark. And Germany and Denmark, by the way, are working very hard to make them go there, not to here. So not just Germany and Denmark, I'm not picking on Germany and Denmark, but the whole of Europe and all across the world. So we have to, it's a very competitive thing, we have to offer something that makes them feel that there's a reason to come here. There's also customs reliefs, and just to be again clear, we've got one customs site at the moment on Nig. It's very specific, it's for a certain purpose. So we don't have, some people have been saying, oh, it means you can take in cheap items and out, nobody knows what's going on. That absolutely not true. There's one site we have, and the kind of stuff they'll be moving is about the size of this room. It's huge, and you can track it, and that's the only stuff they're able to take in and out through the export services there. So it's all very specific. We will also be, and this is I think of interest to communities in the area as well, I mentioned to you that some of the new stuff that's getting built gets business rate relief. So that's not lost in this area. What happens is Highland Council calculates what they would have paid, they make a claim to Scottish Government, and that comes back to the Green Freeport. And that is going to be used for strengthening the communities and the infrastructure and the ports in our area. Now that's not all coming tomorrow. I wish I had 400 million to come tomorrow because there's loads of projects that need done in the area. This will be coming in over the next, it'll be a small amount in the next 5 years, a bigger amount in years 5 to about 15, and then for another 20 years after that, sorry, another 10 years after that, it'll be coming steady. So this is a 25-year fund that we're trying to build up. And I spoke with a lot of the councillors last week, I think say this away now, but and we're trying to think, how do we do like they did in Shetland or in Norway, where they actually built a fund that lasts, you invest in it, and it becomes a fund for the community, for the area, for a very, very long time. So that's one of the things we're trying to work out how we do. What it's not is, some people say, is it an area where there's no regulations? Promise me, I've worked in the public sector and the private sector, and I've worked in building hospitals and schools, I've worked in defence. The Green Freeport is the most regulated thing I've ever seen in my life. I've got the UK government, customs, border force, Scottish government, the local authority, I've got my own board, I've got everybody wanting everything all the time to analyse exactly what's moving. If anything, it's possibly too regulated, but that's my view. So it's very strictly controlled. Our minutes and our agenda go on the internet going forward, so it's very open. And as I say, we're a not-for-profit organisation, so we don't own any assets at all. So I just want to say that because sometimes people imagine we're something completely different. So just to give you an idea of the kind of things that are happening and might happen going forward. That's Port of Nig, that was last year, although they're about to do some more of the same. What you see in this picture, and I apologise, some of you may know this better than I do, is what they call sort of marshalling an assembly. So it's taking bits of the jigsaw, put them together, and then they go away offshore. They're usually assembled offshore, so the bits don't stay here for very long. Well, that's fine, but it doesn't really create an awful lot of employment, if I'm being honest with you. What really would create long-term employment, and therefore good long-term sustainable jobs that might keep people here, is we do some manufacturing. And that's why just the right-hand side of that picture is where the Sumitomo cable factory is being built just now. So we're going to start making the cables that go undersea. And that's going to create long-term jobs, which for somewhere like Contain and all this in regard is hugely important. So that's one site that's developing there. And then we have Port of Cromarty Firth. We're looking to do, again, more of the same. I don't think there'll be any factories there because obviously it's right in front of the town, but they're looking to be able to move some of these components. And there's actually very few places in the whole of Europe that can actually do what can be done here because we have very sheltered waters. Again, for those of you in this who are, again, I'm sure there'll be others who know better than I do, historically, you may or may not know, but the summed naval fleet used to be in the Cromarty Firth here at one point. There was it 22,000 naval personnel here at one point until they had to go further north to be safe. So, this bit of water in that picture is a pretty unique bit of water in European terms, which is why people want to come here and invest here. Only 2 or 3 more slides to go, you'll be glad to hear. So, challenges, because there are challenges. The thing that I have most, and I've had companies, both companies from the Highlands and Scottish companies and UK companies who want to expand or grow here, but also companies from all over the world saying to me, well, we'd love to come here and create lots of jobs, but where are you going to get your workforce? Because your unemployment rate's quite low. And also, where are they going to live? So, being honest with you, that's probably our biggest challenge in some ways. But what I know is that we're losing thousands of young people every year who don't come back. We have a lot of people who are not working, some of them because they can't get a job, or the job that they want to put themselves to. We also I've had a huge amount of people, particularly, and I know this is a generalisation, but women who are tied to childcare saying, I'd love to work, but you cannot get childcare. It's really tough to get childcare. So we've got a huge, very often highly qualified workforce here. The reason they're not working is not because they don't want to work, it's because they can't get childcare, or there's no public transport to get them around. So these are things we have to look at and have to unblock. And then housing, it's a contentious issue for some. For me, it's not contentious. We've got one of the sparsest populated areas in Europe, and we can't build houses. I don't know what it is. Some people don't want housing next to them, I get that, but I've seen time and time again people I know leave the area because they can't get anywhere to live. An example I gave to somebody earlier on, my sister's a paediatric nurse, would have loved to stay in the Highlands. She's now a paediatric nurse in Brisbane, Australia, because she could not get a house in the Highlands. We cannot allow that to keep happening, or we really are going to be in a real spot of bother. So we need to get the housing sorted, we need to get the workforce sorted as well. And there's lots of other infrastructure that has to be done. Transport's one that a lot of people have talked about. For me, what I think we might help invest in is active transport. I'd love to get little shuttle buses moving around the Highlands, particularly in our Firth area, so that people who don't want a car or don't have a car can easily move around, preferably in something like hydrogen-powered buses or something that's clean. Because when we interviewed the 500 young people I talked about early on, what their number one goal was, I thought they were going to say housing and jobs and things. They said their number one mission in life was to get their driver's licence because they were trapped. You don't have your driver's licence, you're trapped. So, and of course now you maybe know, but it's getting increasingly difficult to even get a test, let alone a driver's license. So we need to sort some of these things that are driving our young people away and that are causing blockages in the area. And if we can do active transport, that'd be a great solution to it. But also maybe try and fix some of our transport that maybe is a bit broken. So one of the things I'd love to do, and I've already been speaking to the folks at the Cromarty Ferry, is how do we get that improved? How can we make it a regular service that goes year round, that's got a good reliable thing that people might start using more often. And lastly, and very importantly, is, and I'm very conscious for communities, part of the issue here is, okay, we already see some public services under strain. How can we grow? I mean, you can grow quickly, but how can you do it and maintain the character of the area, make sure people are so comfortable, make sure we don't end up just flushing like happened in the 1970s and 80s with the big oil boom. People poured in. And for those of you who were here at that time, you might remember there were big accommodation barges in the Firth, and you know, some of the pubs locally were very busy, but also a bit rough. So how do we make the area grow, but do it in a way that's more fitting with what we want? So there are definitely challenges, but we've got a long-term view, and we've got some resource to try and fix that. So ultimately, what we think is over the next 25 years, about 11,300 jobs in the whole Highland area. So this is not just in the Armagh Firth. We have to spread the benefit up into Caithness and Sutherland and over to the west coast as well. I'd love to do more with Kishorn, and we're speaking to them all the time. And even across the Murray, there are, as you probably know, one of the biggest fast jet bases in Europe is over in Murray at Lossiemouth, and the 5 engineers over at Loss. And they've got lots of people who are leaving, quite often quite young, who need something else to do. So, you know, this isn't just a benefit just for this immediate area, it's for the whole of the north of Scotland, hopefully. So there's a huge opportunity, and if we can do that, hopefully we can stabilise our population and stop our young people leaving and try and get an economy which is long-term sustainable. Only 2 more slides to go. This is one that I just try to sort of encapsulate everything I've just said in one quick one. If you look back at the Highlands, what happened here in the last 50, 60 years, on the left-hand side, that was the hydro. Remember I talked earlier about all the people that came in to deliver the 70-odd dams and everything else on that generation stations. We had that number of about 10, 11,000, that includes North Argyll and Highland Perthshire as well. But we had about 10, 11, 12,000 people here, you know, came in and did all that work. And some of them stayed, but a lot of them left. But what happened was, the second the dams were done, everybody left. And it was a real fast drop-off. If you wind the clock forward to the 70s and 80s to when Nig and Ardashir were going like a train, again, it was very busy for about 20-odd years. And in fact, Ardashir kept on going for some time after that. But it's a really sharp tail-off when all the installations are done. So we need to try and think of something that stops the population and the area going boom, bust, boom, bust. And that's why we hope this time round it'll be different, because to actually develop out the offshore infrastructure for renewable energy is going to take 50 to 80 years just to get the first round done. So we're hoping this will be a slower start, so we can get the infrastructure and we can get things done right. We can get the local supply chain, we can get local communities with bigger capacity that they can absorb it, but it'll hopefully be something that lasts for generations to come. So that was all I was going to say about that, but I'll leave you with one teaser, if I may, slightly related to what I do, but something different. And it left me a bit sleepless, to be honest, when somebody shared this with me. And it's, if there's anything wrong in what I say at the moment, if there's anything wrong on this slide, I'd love you to tell me, because I hope I'm wrong. It was a chap who's a farmer said to me, and it was him that said to me, he's about 70, and he said to me, right, he says, how old are you? And I said, 50, 51. Well, I was 50 then, I'm 51 now. And he said, well, when you were born, he says, how many were around? And I said, well, when I was born, there was about 4.4 million-ish, 4 billion on the planet. When my mum and dad were born, there was 2.7 billion on the planet. 2.7 billion. So right now, 2025, there's about 8.2 billion people on the planet. And if I'm lucky enough to live to 70, if I'm spared that long, there's going to be at least 9.5 billion people on the planet. So it's gone, in my lifetime, probably from about 4 billion to about 9.5 billion. So the farmer's point to me was this: we're not talking about defence and threats and risks and everything else. His point was, there's one or two things that's going to happen. Either one, we're going to learn how to make food fast, like now, or there's 1 or 2 billion people going to have to leave the planet quickly. And I don't know, that's a bit dramatic, surely. His point was, if we don't start trying to learn how to farm, probably with things like indoor farming using hydroponics and that soon, or intensive protein generation, we're in trouble. So the reason I say that is because we talk about COP and all the energy crisis and greening our economy and all these things. In actual fact, this is a story that's going to take a quick turn very soon. If we don't find a way to generate lots of energy to generate food soon, then we're a bit of bother. So that's a bit of a scary thought to leave it on. And I'd love to, if there's anything wrong in that, I'd be delighted for somebody to tell me I'm wrong. I'm thinking about my daughter, my grandkids when they come along. But at the moment, we're on a trajectory to have that many people. And there's absolutely no way we can provide food for that many people if we keep doing what we're doing. So in the next 20 years, that's going to happen. So the reason I say that is because I do think we have to be pretty radical about how we start doing things differently. And burning more oil and gas isn't the solution either. So anyway, there you go. I'll tease it at the end of it all, just so that I thought through it. Thank you.
Right. Are you ready for questions?
As ready as I will be.
Right. If we have any questions, of course.
Bamboozled everybody with numbers and scary things.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
What do you think that the communities like ours should be doing to prepare for what you're doing in the next 5 years?
Gosh, it's a good question. So 2 or 3 things I would say. One is I would really like if with upcoming generation of people or people in work, as they sort of understand this opportunity that's coming, we're being very careful not to overpromise. So there are already dozens and dozens of apprenticeships and these kind of jobs coming around, but the main wave hasn't. Like the main amount is still a year or 2 away. So we're being careful. We've been in all the schools and a lot of groups. I don't know if any of you here in the university, the third age, the U3A group in Dingle. So I've spoken to quite a few of them as well in the area. So it's one about getting ready for awareness of the opportunity. The second is that I know that the Black Isles have been very good at doing this already. The local police plan that a lot of you worked on. Personally, I think that's a great starting place to understand what communities are looking to need as well in terms of their infrastructure, where the gaps are, what they'd like to see. So let's start planning for bridging some of those gaps when some of the money and things does start to come. But the other one, I know this is the one that not everybody agrees with, is I really think we have to think a wee bit differently about housing. When I was, I lived, my father was a road engineer, so I moved all around the place. I lived in Skye, I've lived in Kintail, I've lived in Fort William, and I've lived in Strathpeffer. And looking back on it, I lived in forestry housing, hydro housing. I didn't live in a police house, although we lived next to one. But there was a time when it was accepted, if you're going to do something like that, you need to bring houses as well. So I think as our ports and harbours start to grow and deliver some of this, we need to seriously think about adding lots of housing so that the workers that are coming or the workers that are staying aren't taking away from the people who are needing housing already, because it's not going to be good if people come to the area and get housing and those who've been in the waiting list for years don't get. So we need to just increase housing. But that's an onus upon all of us, including me. I've objected to housing before, and now I go, should I have done that? So how do we get housing but do it in a responsible way? And again, it's a challenge, but I think it's something we have to do.
On the back of that, to what extent can you get involved, or do you get involved in political lobbying to really get that point across, not just locally but nationally? Yeah,
so I'm always very careful. Lobbying is a lobby register these days. If you lobby, you have to sort of make sure it's open and declared. So what I quite often do is I speak to bigger groups of MSPs or MPs, so that I'm speaking to a wider group, and I press it all the time, but it's interesting. I was in Aberdeen a couple of weeks ago, and if we were in Aberdeen just now, there is total denial that A, oil and gas is infinite, or B, that there's a major crisis that's coming forward, in my view. And I'm sure that's not every in Aberdeen, but there's a lot of politics around at the moment, and the elections are coming up. So we certainly try and keep people informed and push, but I don't tend to go like one-to-one lobbying or anything like that, because yeah, it starts to get difficult if you're seen to be speaking to one political group and not another.
Yeah, sorry, I just meant
all in general.
Generally.
Yeah, no, we do, and you know, we have I have one of the things we do every 2 months is the local councillors get a chance to speak to us, and I get sort of what's called the members monitoring group. So whenever I have the groups of councillors there, I speak to them and try and express. And to be fair, that's why, although there are challenges, what I've talked about and what the Green Freeport is trying to do, pretty much unanimous support about the underlying reasons for it and what we're trying to do. But yeah, I'd love to push it, especially up the agenda, because at the moment, what I'm getting a little bit of from certain parties, well, speaking openly, including sort of Reform and Conservatives, is that there's no need for any renewable energy. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, there's not a shred of evidence to prove what you've just said is correct. There's lots of populism around that, but there's no actual evidence for what they've said. So I would love to, and I am speaking to all parties when I can, saying some. If there's anything wrong with what I've said there, please prove me wrong. I'd love to be wrong on that, but I haven't seen anybody give me any evidence yet.
You talk about housing. How many units are you talking about?
So across the whole Highland area, and I'm not we don't do housing person. So the council have looked at it. They looked at the demand there is if nothing else is happening. So the growth in housing, partly because families kind of being smaller or breaking up and those kind of things, and housing coming off. So the housing challenge over the next 20 odd years is going to be 24,000 houses across the Highlands.
And what about the infrastructure?
The infrastructure, that's got to go hand in hand. It's got to go hand in hand. You mean likes of roads, water, power? Yeah.
And all the infrastructure, schools?
Yeah. And this is the catch-22. We absolutely need all that to happen. But the challenge is, if you don't build the houses, there's nowhere for the new doctors or nurses to live. And if you don't do that, then there's nobody paying rates, which in turn pays.
But then you've got to entice the doctors and these people to come here to work.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then, so that they'll work here, and part of the challenge is, so I'll give you an example of Elgin, and I was involved in this. So Elgin, Dr. Grace Hospital, desperate need for doctors and nurses. The overpowering reason that they didn't come is because there's nowhere to live. Local housing companies even said, we'll build houses in advance and we'll give doctors and nurses somewhere to live. But the main reason cited by the NHS in that part of the world was there's nowhere for our staff to come and live. And so that's not the only reason. We've got, as you know, we've got a shortage of medical professionals in general. So is it catch-22? But I agree, you can't just build houses. You've got to have dentists, nurseries, schools, doctors, surgeons, all that's got to go hand in hand.
And is the Scottish Government putting any money into it?
Into this? Yeah, so the plan is that the £400 million that is being given out, if you like, as a tax break to the investors, that's coming from the Scottish Government back to the Freeport here. So that doesn't come from, a lot of our support comes from the UK Government in terms of the tax breaks, but the Scottish Government's part is to put in the 400 million over the next 20 odd years. And it's intended to do things like, so one of the first things we're looking at doing is, partly because it's a big issue in Invergordon as well as the Tomach Junction roundabout, because if that's town's going to grow and incorporate this, then it just can't unless that's sorted, and it's also a bad accident black spot.
Yeah.
So there's things like that that we're, even though we're not in charge of road networks, we're saying we need to put some money to try and fix it, to get things moving.
And these industries that you hope to come, will they bring their own employees?
So the plan is, what we've seen so far with Sumitomo is that some of the senior management come because they need to try and build a thing, but largely it's local employment, and that's going to be the case in the long term. What will happen, I'll grant you, in the medium short term is, take for example, We've got one company that would love to come in and take 200 odd welders and platers. Now, you probably know this, but at the moment there isn't 200 welder platers in Scotland because we've stopped doing those things. So what's going to happen is we're setting up training centres to try and get as many as we can initially. They're likely to, and this is happening in Glasgow, it's happening in the south, likely to ship in expert welders from all in Europe. But what will hopefully happen is, as we train up our own, that number will decrease of people coming into the area.
The same apprenticeships are a thing of the past.
I know.
Most youngsters now want to go to university, get a degree, and do a nice clean job. Well, this country was built on people going out and getting their hands dirty.
Well, I'm glad, I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. And which is why I'm glad to say that we're pushing now back to apprenticeships. And one thing that's helping in that is because if you go to university now, especially if you study elsewhere in the UK, not in Scotland, well, for those of you who are paying it right now, our students are leaving a university degree with 50, 60, 70,000 pound debt. And it's no way to go. I'm really pleased to say that we're talking more and more about people doing apprenticeships and vocational training. And the reality is that if you're a highly skilled manufacturer or lots of other jobs that does an apprenticeship now, you get paid more than somebody that's a graduate. So there's a real pressure on. I've pushed my way onto the Scottish Apprenticeship Advisory Board. And I'm saying at the moment, a fraction goes to colleges to do apprenticeships, and that much goes to universities. Now, I'm not saying university education is bad, my daughter's there, but we need to pivot that to start doing practical apprenticeships, manufacturing, and skills that people can actually get long-term jobs with. Instead of, I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody here, but somebody doing sports psychology. Some of my friends do sports psychology, but great degree, fantastic. You'll not get a job. You'll not get a job at the end of it. You're not going to get a job at the end of it. There's just too many sports psychologists, and it might be a brilliant thing to do. You're not going to get a job. You're going to end up working probably in a retail job where you're not happy. Whereas if you do something like manufacturing, and I'm glad to say it's not just guys, it's girls as well doing this stuff, then that's what we desperately need. So we're talking about, one of the things I'd like to do if we get some funds is making bursaries and scholarships for apprentices in the area. So we need to start making stuff.
That's right.
Are you going into schools at all? Working with DYW?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've only got 5 in my team, but one of them is full-time going into schools, primary schools and secondary schools, and trying to talk about what we've talked about today. I've been to, I think I've spoken to now 1,200 S4s and S5s in the last year and a half to try and get across to them. I keep saying that, put your phone down. If you put your phone down for 3 seconds, listen to me, you might actually be able to afford a car. Sometimes to do that makes the trick. So we are trying to impress upon young people that this is an opportunity to look at. And I joke with them, I say, if you want to be an influencer or a professional footballer, that's fine. You're not going to get a job doing that, let's be honest. But you might well get, at the moment, if you're an electrician or a plumber or a brickie and some of these things in this area, you'll get, especially if you're an electrician, you'll get work for the rest of your life. And it's not necessarily doing big power stuff, but even just building houses or these kind of trades. So we need to as an area to move on to that.
Sorry, Richard was waving his arm a few minutes ago.
You've covered some of this already, Calum, but as someone who lived in this area in the 1970s and saw the oil boom and empty shans and the smelter and everything else, the evidence of that was that it was exactly the opposite way around. That the infrastructure and services came much later. It was, and even the housing. There's workers' camp at Invergordon at the smelter. There's one at MK Shan. As I said, there's the Highland Queen, the ferry down at Nig that the guy stayed on.
Yeah.
Are you confident that that's not going to be the same story this time around?
I think, and not just here, but if you look at, I worked in Aberdeen for 8 or 9 years. Aberdeen's a place, for example, they've just finished their infrastructure just as everything's calming down.
Exactly.
So I think we've got hopefully lessons of the past and lessons elsewhere to learn to do it a bit differently. So that's just why, even though some of this big work isn't coming for I mean, we're not predicting there being thousands of jobs here next year or even the year after. It's going to take, 5 years, probably 5 to 10 years to really build. So we've got a chance to do that a bit differently if we can. What I think will happen is, and this is not necessarily to do with what I'm talking about offshore, but we've got other big bits of work happening in the area as well. So we've got the A9 getting built. We've got transmission lines. There's about 2,000 people working doing transmission lines just now. We've got the big pump storage schemes in the Great Glen, which, by the way, if you're not aware of them, halfway down the Great Glen, you're talking about £3 or £4 billion worth of work happening on that one of those schemes alone. There's a lot of stuff happening, so I think it's probably inevitable that there will be temporary workers areas, because there isn't the workers in the area to do that. What would be great though was if we left as much as we can a housing stock that maybe they use temporarily, that's, or even service land which can be used for affordable housing and things going forward. So that's the challenge, is how we do it and we get ahead of the curve so that as little of that disruption happens as possible.
Do you mean a bit like the idea of the Commonwealth Village? Build it for the purpose, but then give it over after?
Absolutely. The one thing I'm very careful of is, imagine we built somewhere in this, not this immediately, somewhere around Inverness or Dingwall or something like that, 300 houses, and put the workers in there. I can promise you a lot of people would be saying, how come they get a house?
Yeah.
Now, we'd say, well, because they're working here, but they'll be gone, through your time. So we need to try and do it that the general housing stock lifts up. I think a good thing to do would be, especially with those temporary workers camps, and this is being done in other places, is to get the, back to the services, get the drainage, sewage, the roads all fixed in, and it might be temporary, but then when it's finished, it means there's somewhere you can actually more cheaply build housing, affordable housing for the long term. But those are some of the challenges.
Mark,
No, just go back to the early point of apprentices. You also know my background is obviously work together, Calum, but I think there's a general, getting people out of schools to be interested in apprenticeships is a challenge. We kick on apprentices every year. It's a challenge finding people that are interested in the trades and things, and also there's probably a disconnect between what's available at the colleges. Because you say, there's going to be a predisposed focus on universities that try to get the right courses available locally at the colleges, because we would probably take on more people, but there's not the spaces at college, and then there's not necessarily the interest from young people to come into trades.
There's a bit of a vicious circle there, because I know that the local college, I don't know if anybody here works in the college or Inverness college sector, but I know that last year they had, not just in construction-related courses, but in general, they had 700 more young people or people apply for places in the college than they had funding for. Yeah. So 700 young people in this area tried to get a place in Inverness College, not North Highland West or Lochaber or Skye, just Inverness College, that didn't get funding. So, and those are the kind of things we have to stop. We have to stop somebody who's intended in doing a course that could, and these could be people doing dental nursing and electricians and things that would be great for the area. So you're right, that's been in line to all of that. And to be fair to the colleges, they are now really listening. The bit that's a bit challenging for them is if a college, and there's a bit of a lag, so when a college says I've got to design a course in places, I have to know 3 or 4 months in advance. Can you tell me exactly how many young folk are going to do that and how many of them will get a job exactly then? So there's a bit of it's a bit difficult to break that. But we are absolutely talking to colleges as our employers, saying how do we make sure that that's aligned. But it's a bit like having a crystal ball. You need to know exactly when it's going to happen.
I think we are definitely seeing a shift back. There are still a lot of young people in school who their goal is university and that's their plan, and they have aspirations for that. But I would say in the time I've been a teacher, I'm seeing a pretty significant shift more towards people wanting to work straight out of school or wanting to train while they work, so an apprenticeship style. So it's definitely not the numbers I presume yourself would have seen, but it's not, I think, as bad as maybe fear it is.
I think there's been a shift in the last 4 or 5 years after COVID. So I coach, well I don't do it now, but I coach shinty in that locally. So it's anecdotal, definitely more people saying, I don't really want to go down and end up like thousands of pounds in debt, and I'll leave all my friends and I'll go down there and end up a lot of them are saying they know if they can get a vocational qualification, they'll get even get a degree. You know, there doesn't have to be it could be all levels, but you know, apparently a good vocational qualification, and leave with a job and no debt, which, bear in mind...
Because a lot of these young people are growing up with the cost of living crisis, they're really seeing how difficult it is, so they know actually the priority is getting a job and an apprenticeship or something like what yourselves are offering is going to do that for them. They're much more interested in it.
And it's interesting, I'd imagine everybody in this room, when you worked and if you still are working, when you were young, you thought, well, I'll try and get a good job and I'll try and get a house and I'll get a mortgage. And my first flat wasn't very nice, and we had a mattress on the floor and an old couch, but you know, you got a place to live and you started, you know, if you ask most young folk, and if you're in education and all this, if you ask them, do you even think you'll ever own a house? They go, oh, no chance. Unless my parents give me it, I will never own a house. That's what's in their heads. So we really need to try and do something. I'm not saying they have to go into ownership. There's other models abroad and in Europe where people rent. You know, they don't all necessarily own houses. But so we need to try and bring back. I think it goes to the heart of it is getting people manufacturing and building and doing things again, like adding value through that route rather than just retail and things like that. Nothing wrong with retail. My mum owns a shop, so I'm not got retail, but you know, it needs to be a variety of things to do. So.
Any one last question from anyone? Okay, thank you, Calum.
You're welcome.
Interesting and a lot of topics there for thought.
Absolutely. And congratulations on the way everything you're doing here. It's absolutely fantastic to see. I was a chair in Kilmorrick Community Hall for 12 years. I know how hard it is to get little things to happen, but what you're doing here is absolutely amazing. And we come over from Beauly to sometimes come over here to walk in the woodland and things like that. So it's really impressive what you're doing. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.